On one sunny day, I found myself strolling along the familiar precipice trail in Acadia National Park. This trail felt like an old friend to me, each turn and tree root a comforting sight. While some might not find this hike exciting, for me, it was a calming ritual. I'm Ella, and I come from Portland, Maine. I'm just your average person who loves spending time outdoors and owns a bunch of hiking shoes. Walking this trail always helps me clear my mind. It's where I think about work, life, and everything in between. Usually it's just me, the birds, and maybe another hiker or two giving a friendly nod as we pass. But that day, the woods felt quieter than usual, almost strangely so. I guessed maybe folks stayed home due to the weather forecast, expecting a storm that never showed up. I was trekking along the trail, right where the trees bunch up close together. That's when I heard it. My name, Ella. It sounded just like me, clear as a bell, as if someone was standing right beside me. I turned around fast, half thinking it was a friend playing a joke on me, like maybe someone I knew was hiking right behind me, but there was nobody there. At first I chuckled, thinking I must have imagined it all, but then it happened again, a soft whisper on the breeze. Ella. This time, it made me shiver all over. I wasn't alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that somebody or something was watching me. It wasn't exactly scary, more like I was puzzled. I followed the sound, my feet guiding me off the main path to a place I'd never discovered before, a hidden glen tucked away like a secret. The sunlight barely peeked through the thick trees here, and there, sitting on a branch, was this bird. But it wasn't like any bird I'd ever seen. It was large, with feathers that gleamed in colors I couldn't even describe, like the sheen of oil on water. Its eyes were deep black, fixed on me as I stepped into the clearing. The most peculiar thing happened next. The bird opened its beak, and out came my voice, calling my name once more. I have to admit I was starting to feel a bit bewildered. I stood there, completely still, locked in a staring match with this bird. It tilted its head slowly, as if it were studying me with curiosity. Then it began to mimic other sounds, like laughter, typing on a keyboard, and even the rumble of a car engine. It was as if this bird had been eavesdropping on the world, and now it was flaunting its collection of noises. I cautiously tried to move closer, but the bird didn't seem to approve. It emitted a sharp, piercing sound that seemed to go right through me. I froze, holding my breath, while the bird slowly unfurled its massive wings. They were much larger than I had imagined, and they caught the sunlight, creating a dazzling display of colors. I couldn't help but wonder how such a brightly colored creature survived in the wild. With a single powerful flap of its wings, the bird soared into the sky. The leaves rustled in the wind it created. It flew upwards with grace and precision, not making a sound as it disappeared into the distance. All its imitations were left behind, lingering in the air like a fading echo. The bird circled above the glen once, then soared high above the trees and disappeared from view. The sunlight, which had briefly danced on the colors of its feathers, now seemed dimmer, the enchantment of the moment fading away. I returned to the trail, my thoughts swirling, and I'm pretty sure my mouth was hanging open. Was it real? A new species, perhaps? A mutation? Or had the solitude finally gotten to me? Had I imagined the whole thing? The more I pondered, the less certain I became about what had transpired. I couldn't even trust my own senses anymore. I was still reeling from the encounter. As I walked along the trail, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the bird again or to hear my own voice echoing through the trees. But there was nothing. It was as if I had stepped out of reality for a moment, and now everything had snapped back to normal. I haven't shared this with anyone. I mean, who would believe me? It does sound pretty unbelievable, right? A bird that can copy anything, even someone's voice. But every time I return to that trail, I can't help but wonder if I'll hear it again calling my name. So far, nothing. But I can't shake this feeling that somewhere out there, in a secret glen, there's a creature with a voice that sounds just like mine, waiting to speak again. And I can't decide if I want to hear it or not. What do you think? In Yonkers, New York, during the 1990s, life was a mix of ordinary routines and unexpected surprises. Officer Jackson patrolled the streets diligently, following in the footsteps of his family's legacy in law enforcement. He felt a deep sense of pride in his role, knowing it was his destined path. Jackson was a man of facts and evidence. He relied on what he could see, touch, and record. Yet recent events challenged his beliefs. A string of strange burglaries puzzled him. These weren't typical robberies. They were quiet, leaving behind an unsettling feeling for the victims. Each case presented the same mystery. No signs of forced entry. Locks remained intact, windows sealed shut, and alarms undisturbed. It seemed as if the thief had vanished into thin air, leaving confusion and loss in their wake. Jackson's investigation unfolded methodically, each step executed with the precision of a practiced routine. He talked to those who had been robbed, wandered through neighborhoods, and pored over hours of security footage. Yet there was no trace of the thief, only the occasional flutter of a passing moth on the screens. During one of these late-night sessions, something caught Jackson's eye, a faint figure barely visible on the high-definition footage. It moved strangely, its shape resembling a human but somehow distorted. The more Jackson tried to focus on it, the more his head throbbed, as if his brain refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. As his investigation deepened, Jackson found himself venturing into the less traveled parts of Yonkers. He navigated through tangled alleys and forgotten streets, far from the bustling downtown area. Whispers circulated among the locals about a mysterious figure lurking in the darkest corners of the city. They called it the Wraith, a name tinged with mystery and fear. During Jackson's investigation, he received a tip about a rundown building that warranted exploration. As he stepped inside, a musty odor filled his nostrils, accompanied by a sharp metallic scent that made him scrunch up his nose and blink away tears. And there it was. The creature perched on a heap of debris in a distant corner, its limbs sprawled in an odd imitation of human relaxation. Its body had a humanoid shape, but its skin was a pallid gray, stretched thinly over a skeletal frame. Its eyes, or what passed for them, were nothing but dark hollows. The strange creature tilted its head, and Jackson couldn't help but feel a little scared. It moved in a way that reminded him of animals he'd seen, but its eyes held something different, a cleverness that made him uneasy. Jackson suddenly realized he wasn't the one in control. He was the one being chased. Even though he knew he should back away and get help, Jackson found himself moving closer, until he was just out of the creature's grasp. It was like he and the creature had an unspoken agreement, a feeling that they were both out of place here. Jackson sensed that the creature didn't want to hurt anyone. It seemed lost and confused, far from where it belonged. In that moment, Jackson made a big decision. He decided to leave the chase and step back from the building, all the while keeping his eyes on the strange creature. It stayed there, watching him with its deep, dark eyes. Jackson couldn't help but feel sorry for it. Now, he had to choose what to do next. He could go back and tell everyone about what he saw. But what good would it do? Who could even deal with something like that? Instead, Jackson chose to keep quiet. He didn't tell anyone about the creature. He kept it a secret. Even though there were still break-ins happening, Jackson noticed a pattern. They were happening less often, and they seemed to avoid houses. Now they were just happening in random empty places. As time passed, weeks turned into months, and the strange happenings in Yonkers started happening less and less. Jackson, patrolling the streets, felt the weight of the city's trust on his shoulders. He carried the truth with him, a burden he bore alone. Then, just as quietly as it had started, the thefts stopped. There were no more reports of missing things, no more mysterious break-ins. In the end, Jackson retired, honored with a medal for his service, but he never spoke of what he knew. The mysterious creature, whatever it was, became a part of the city's untold stories, known only to Jackson. He kept the secret for years, feeling that the world didn't need to know about every strange thing, especially those just passing through, searching for home. But now, he's sharing his story because he believes the world has changed. People's minds are more open now. And anyway, the thefts in Yonkers never started again, so he feels it's safe to tell the secret. He hopes the creature found its way back home at last. Once upon a time on the sunny West Coast, there lived a teacher named Mr. Rodriguez. He wasn't like other teachers who stuck only to textbooks and tests. Nope, Mr. Rodriguez was special. He had a mind full of curiosity and wonder, always eager to explore the mysteries of the world. He loved nothing more than finding real-life adventures to share with his students. In the bustling city of Fresno, California, where even the shadows seemed to sweat during heat waves, Mr. Rodriguez spent his weekdays in a classroom filled with the hum of an old air conditioner. Despite the sweltering heat, he taught his students about the world beyond their city, opening their minds to new ideas and possibilities. But when the weekend arrived, Mr. Rodriguez traded the chalk dust of the classroom for the trail dust of Yosemite National Park, just a short 70-mile journey from his home. On this particular weekend, something felt different. As Mr. Rodriguez laced up his boots and set out on the familiar trails, he sensed an unusual energy in the air. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation as he walked, the rhythm of his boots echoing against the path, accompanied by the distant calls of birds. That day, Mr. Rodriguez decided to explore a different path than his usual one. He wanted to change things up and escape the relentless heat. This new path was shaded by tall trees, providing relief from the pesky insects buzzing around in the hot air. As he ventured deeper into the forest, surrounded by towering trees and massive granite cliffs, Mr. Rodriguez couldn't shake a strange feeling. It wasn't quite fear, more like a nagging sense that something wasn't quite right. You know, like when you have something important on your mind, but can't quite remember what it is. Then out of the corner of his eye, he spotted it. A shape, a presence that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. It had the rough outline of a bear, but its form blurred and shifted, almost as if it were part of the forest itself. And to top it off, the creature kept darting in and out of his sight, making it hard for Mr. Rodriguez to get a clear look. Filled with curiosity, Mr. Rodriguez's mind buzzed as he decided to follow the mysterious creature. It moved through the forest with such ease, blending in seamlessly with its surroundings, yet also standing out in its uniqueness. Each time Mr. Rodriguez thought he had lost sight of it, the creature reappeared, almost as if it were leading him on a journey. He pursued the creature, his heart pounding steadily in his chest, the forest growing eerily quiet around him. The usual chirps of birds and rustle of leaves seemed to vanish, or perhaps Mr. Rodriguez was simply too focused on the creature to notice. He had a feeling that this experience would be something he'd remember for the rest of his days. Finally, in a clearing illuminated by the warm glow of the setting sun, Mr. Rodriguez caught up to the creature. He gazed at it intently, taking in every detail. It still had the shape of a bear, but there was something extraordinary about it. Its fur shimmered with an otherworldly gleam, and its eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to hold a profound intelligence. In that moment, Mr. Rodriguez felt a mixture of fear and awe wash over him. As Mr. Rodriguez stood there, his mind raced with questions. Was the creature real or just a trick of his imagination? It seemed to study him, tilting its head in a thoughtful manner, and in that moment, Mr. Rodriguez felt something he couldn't quite explain. It was beyond words or labels. At that moment, the creature's identity didn't matter to him. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still as the creature turned and disappeared into the depths of the forest. Suddenly the spell was broken, and the sounds of the forest returned, the rustle of leaves, the hoot of an owl in the distance. Realizing it was time to head back, Mr. Rodriguez retraced his steps until he reached the familiar trail. It felt both comforting and changed by his encounter with the mysterious creature. He wondered if he should share his story with others, perhaps with close friends and family, but maybe not with his students. Parents might not approve of such tales in the classroom, and he certainly didn't want to risk his job. Returning to Fresno, Mr. Rodriguez walked along the streets, his mind filled with memories of his extraordinary encounter. As he reflected on his experience, he realized that the true lesson he could impart to his students was the wonder of the world around them. He understood that sometimes the journey itself is more important than reaching a specific destination. And he knew that some stories don't need a neat ending to be meaningful. Yes, he decided, he liked that idea. It turned out that he had learned a great deal from his adventure that day. Once, while working late at the Taco Bell on West Country Road in Merrill, Wisconsin, I spotted something peculiar. It looked like a creature straight out of a spooky storybook. Have you ever heard of dogman monsters? I hadn't, especially not in Wisconsin. Have you ever come across one? At our Taco Bell, we're open until late hours, and I often find myself closing up shop. It's not the most exciting job, but someone's got to do it. Unfortunately, I usually end up paired with this other worker who isn't exactly the most enthusiastic. But hey, I can't complain. If he doesn't pull his weight, I have to pick up the slack. Besides, I'd rather not be labeled as a tattletale by complaining to the manager. Nobody likes a tattletale, right? That night, all I wanted was to head home. Some days just drag on, you know. It was past 3 a.m, and there I was, still scrubbing the floors while my coworker kept disappearing into the bathroom to avoid work. Eventually, I finished up all my tasks, so I decided to take out the trash. I stepped outside and made my way to the dumpster. It's tucked away in a shed with 3 sides. As I turned the corner, I caught sight of something darting behind the dumpster. At first, I thought it might be a homeless person seeking shelter because it was so late. So without thinking much, I called out, "Hey!" By the way, I don't mind people living on the street, but whoever was back there needed to leave. When I called out, there was no response. I paused because I needed to unlock the padlock and I couldn't see who was hiding. It made me nervous because I couldn't be sure if they were up to no good. For all I knew, it could have been someone planning to rob me. Unsure of what to do, I shouted, "I'm calling the cops." Suddenly, I heard a loud, menacing growl. It startled me because I had thought I saw a person back there, but now it sounded like a big dog, you know, that deep, rumbling growl they make. In that moment, I made a rather silly decision. I grabbed a rock and hurled it at the dumpster, hoping the loud clang would scare away whoever or whatever was hiding there. But to my surprise, instead of running off, the creature darted towards me at full speed. Oh boy, I had never seen anything like it before. It stood upright on 2 legs, just like a person, but it was much larger than me. Its head resembled that of a dog, complete with a snout and sharp teeth that I could see because it was snarling fiercely. I dropped the bag of trash and sprinted for the door. My brain couldn't make sense of what the creature was, but one thing was for sure. I was certain it wanted to eat me. Reaching the door, I found it locked. Stan, the coworker who was supposed to be there with me, had gone and locked it as per company policy, even if it's just for a quick trip outside. I had the key in my hand, but I was trembling so much that I struggled to fit it into the lock. I scanned around, but there was no sign of Stan. I glanced over my shoulder, relieved to see that the creature wasn't following me. It must have been distracted by the trash bag. With shaky hands, I managed to insert the key and twist the lock shut. Once inside, I slammed the door shut and locked it again. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. I told Stan about the strange creature I saw, almost like a werewolf, lurking outside. He just chuckled, not taking me seriously. I suppose I would have reacted the same if he told me such a wild tale. But let me assure you, that creature was real. It was covered in thick fur, like that of a dog or a wolf, with a large head resembling a canine's and ears that stood tall. I didn't get a good look at its paws, but its eyes glowed yellow, and its sharp teeth were hard to miss. It definitely moved on 2 legs, just like a person. I couldn't recall seeing a tail, though. About 15 minutes later, when we finally left, I hurried to my car. It wasn't parked near the dumpster, so I dashed over, hopped in, and locked the doors tight. As I drove past the dumpster on the way out, I glanced over, but the creature was nowhere in sight. It might have been hiding behind it, though. I even told my manager about the encounter because I didn't want to work the closing shift anymore, but he just brushed it off, thinking I was making up stories. The only plan I could come up with was to go there one night when I wasn't working, park my car facing the dumpster building, and keep my camera ready. I figured I needed a photo for anyone to believe me. Plus, who knows, maybe I could even sell a picture like that to a magazine or something. You'll be the first to know if I manage to snap a photo of that creature. While I was researching spooky stuff that happened to me lately, I stumbled upon your channel. It's a bit scary, but also kind of nice to know other folks have had similar things happen. After watching a bunch of your videos to find stories like mine, I thought it's only fair I share mine too. Maybe it'll help someone else figure out their own weird experiences. I'm a builder, and I got into construction after finishing high school and worked my way up over time. I'm not a master at anything specific, but after years of different jobs, I can build almost anything. Started my own company 7 years ago. Every builder has some odd tales. Any job where you deal with the public, especially in their homes, can lead to strange stuff. But only a few builders have stories that get close to being spooky. It all began like usual. I was hired to put in a new septic tank for a young couple who just bought their first house. This was back before housing prices went through the roof, but they were still on a tight budget. The place was an old farmhouse from the turn of the century and was in rough shape. They thought they could fix it up with the money they saved. I've seen this happen a lot with younger people. They watch videos on social media and HGTV and think they can buy a fixer-upper and make it awesome. Then they realize it's harder than they thought. At first, I was annoyed that so many young folks thought my job was easy, but then I saw how much money I was making when they realized it wasn't so simple. Now you might think, old farmhouse must be haunted. But I never set foot inside. I was digging in the backyard for the septic tank when I found something unfortunate. Bones, lots of them. Most times when you find a bone, it's from an animal, but if I'm unsure, I call the police right away. It's illegal to keep digging if there might be human remains, and I don't want to risk my contractor license. The cops came. Forensic folks confirmed the bones were human, and a special team dug out the rest without messing up their position. There were over 24 skeletons arranged in 2 circles, one inside the other, with a big elk skull in the middle. The bones were really old, like from colonial times or even earlier. The way the bodies were arranged wasn't normal, and there were marks on the neck bones like someone cut their throats. Looked like some kind of weird ritual. I didn't dwell on it much. History is cool, but I was more focused on them finishing so I could get back to work and get paid. But that night, something weird happened. I knew it was a dream right away, which was odd because I've never had that happen before. I was in my room, but there was no ceiling. Above me were stars, but they were weird colors and moving strangely. Then, a figure with antlers appeared in the room and circled around me. It had markings all over its body like tattoos or paint, twisting around in patterns. It didn't seem aggressive, but its presence felt menacing as it circled. Its face looked stern but confused. Then in a flash, it shoved me hard into my bed. I woke up with a pain in my chest. I tried to shake off the nightmare, but there was a red hand-shaped mark on my chest. That was harder to ignore. The whole drive to the worksite, I felt uneasy. When I got there, the owner came out, looking upset, and there was a moving truck in the driveway. He was clearly bothered by something, and I knew what it was. He said he didn't want to go ahead with the septic tank anymore, and that he planned to sell the place. I asked why he didn't call me. He just shook his head, saying sorry and that he forgot about the septic tank. He looked really shaken. I asked if he had a nightmare, then his eyes widened, but he tried to play it off. We stood there in silence for a bit. I could tell he wanted to say something, but couldn't. I would have left it at that, but I noticed a bruise on his arm like someone had grabbed him roughly. He saw me looking. "Did you see him?" he asked me. "Yeah," I said, unbuttoning my shirt to show him the handprint on my chest. He looked shocked, then oddly relieved. We didn't talk more after that. He just nodded, and I left. Part of me wanted to ask for details about his dream to compare to mine, but I figured it was best to leave it. It might be a bit of a letdown, but the guy clearly didn't want to talk about it.